Accident Investigator Paul Stansel to provide an overview of the derailment. The floor is yours.
Good morning, Chair Homendy and members of the Board of Inquiry. On February 3rd, 2003, about 8:54 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, eastbound Norfolk Southern Railway General Merchandise Freight Train 32N derailed in East Palestine, Ohio. At the time of the accident, visibility conditions were dark and clear. The weather was 10 degrees Fahrenheit with no precipitation. The NTSB reviewed mechanical inspections and train operations for train 32N from where the train originated as part of the investigation. The train set was built at the Terminal Railroad Association yard in Madison, Illinois, where a mechanical inspection and air brake tests were performed by a railroad qualified mechanical inspector on February 1st. The train departed the Madison, Illinois yard on February 1st as eastbound General Merchandise Train 32N. Train 32N traveled to Decatur, Illinois, where it had 55 rail cars removed and 41 rail cars added to the train consist. The third locomotive was moved from the front of the train to mid-train as a distributive power unit locomotive. The 41 rail cars that were added received a mechanical inspection and air brake test by a railroad qualified mechanical inspector. The train was cleared to depart with no identified mechanical problems. On February 2nd, near Beaumont, Illinois, train 32N experienced brake pipe air pressure problems, which caused a 2-hour delay while the end of train device was replaced by mechanical personnel, and the train 32N was cleared to continue. Later that day, near Williamsport, Indiana, train 32N experienced a train line-induced emergency brake application due to a broken coupler knuckle on a non-hazardous material tank car. The broken knuckle was replaced by mechanical personnel, and the train was cleared to continue. On February 3rd, train 32N departed Peru, Indiana. The train consist remained unchanged with 2 locomotives at the head end, 149 rail cars, and a DPU locomotive mid-train. Train 32N continued to Toledo, Ohio with no reported problems. In Toledo, Ohio, train 32N departed with a new train engineer, conductor, and conductor trainee. At 8:53, as train 32N operated through the village of East Palestine, Ohio, the train crew received an audible critical alarm message over the locomotive radio for a hot bearing on axle 101 on the south rail. The 101st axle corresponded to the lead axle of the 23rd rail car behind the locomotives, which was hopper car GPLX 75465. The train engineer was in the process of stopping the train when a train line emergency brake application occurred. Following the emergency brake application, train event recorder data indicated the locomotives traveled an additional 1,368 feet before coming to a stop. Rail cars 1 through 22 remained behind the locomotives and stopped east of the derailment pileup. 38 rail cars were derailed and included rail cars 23 through 60. The rail cars came to rest about 400 feet east of the Pleasant Drive Highway Rail grade crossing in East Palestine, Ohio. 12 rail cars, cars 61 through 72, did not derail, but were damaged by the post-accident fire. The remaining 77 cars, cars 73 through 149, did not derail and stopped west of the derailment pileup. The investigation identified scrape markings along the top railhead of the south running rail at milepost 49.5, which is about 120 feet west of the Pleasant Drive Highway Rail grade crossing. This was determined to be the point of derailment. Wheelset 1 from hopper car GPLX 75465 was found adjacent to the car with the L1 journal burnt off and located just east of the derailment pileup. The burnt-off journal and bearing segments were located just west of the derailment pileup on the south side of Main Track 1. NS Train 32N went by 40 wayside defect detector locations between February 1st in Madison, Illinois, and February 3rd in East Palestine, Ohio. The 40 wayside defect detector locations consisted of 39 dragging equipment detectors, 10 hot wheel detectors, 1 T-bogey detector or truck bogey optical geometry inspection detector, 1 wheel impact load detector, and 39 hot bearing detectors. Post-accident interviews of the previous train crews did not identify any defect detector alarms for train 32N. In addition, data from the NS ATC desk also did not indicate any critical alerts for train 32N during the prior train movements. The NTSB investigation focused on the 3 hot-bearing defect detectors that train 32N traversed approaching the point of derailment. The Sebring detector was located about 30 miles from the point of derailment at milepost 79.8. After train 32N traversed the Sebring detector, data indicated the L1 axle bearing temperature was 38 degrees and the R1 axle was 18 degrees, while the train was traveling at a maximum speed of 37 miles per hour over the detector. There was no alarm radio broadcast to the train crew, nor an alert sent to the ATC desk, since all wheel bearing temperatures were within tolerance. The Salem detector was located about 20 miles from the point of derailment at milepost 69.1. When train 32N traversed the Salem detector, data indicated the L1 axle bearing temperature was 103 degrees and the R1 axle bearing was 20 degrees, with the train traveling at a maximum speed of 25 miles per hour over the detector. There was no alarm radio broadcast to the train crew, but a non-critical alert was transmitted to the ATC desk as the L1 axle bearing was showing an increase in temperature from the previous defect detector location. The East Palestine detector was located about 0.3 of a mile from the point of derailment at milepost 49.8. When train 32N traversed the East Palestine detector, data indicated the L1 axle bearing temperature was 253 degrees and the R1 axle bearing was 20 degrees, with the train traveling at a maximum speed of 47 miles per hour over the detector. The detector broadcasted an audible alert over the radio to the train crew of the critical alarm as soon as the 23rd rail car traversed the detector field equipment. No data was transmitted to the ATC desk since the train stopped over the detector equipment, and the detector would not transmit the data until the entire train traversed and cleared the equipment. The NTSB investigation also collected additional sources of information that could help identify a point along the route of train 32N where indications of mechanical problems initiated. Following the accident, investigators were provided security videos from private homes and local businesses located along the railroad tracks. In addition, NTSB canvassed the area around the derailment site and worked back along the accident train route. Additional witnesses and video footage were identified and obtained. This is a compilation showing train 32N as it approached East Palestine on the night of the derailment. About 50 miles from the point of derailment, as train 32N traveled through Ravenna, Ohio, 2 video sources were identified. The first was at Spring Street, and the second one was near Prospect Street. The video footage indicated train 32N going by, but did not show any indications of mechanical problems. About 45 miles from the point of derailment, train 32N was next recorded as it went through Rootstown, Ohio, near Industry Road. Train 32N came into view through the trees, and a high-pitched squeal can be heard. The squeal increases in intensity for about 2 seconds, then is no longer heard again. About 40 miles from the point of derailment, train 32N was near Keystone Street in Alliance, Ohio. The train is visible, but did not show any indications of a mechanical problem. About 38 miles from the accident, train 32N was next recorded by several cameras as it went through Sebring, Ohio, near West California Avenue. A screenshot of train 32N came into view, but no indications of a mechanical problem can be seen. In Salem, Ohio, about 26 miles from the point of derailment, Train 32N was recorded near West Wilson Street, and the glow of a fire is visible underneath the 23rd hopper car. "32N is again recorded near Ellsworth Avenue, South Lincoln Avenue, and Snyder Road, showing a visible glow of a fire underneath the same rail car. As train 32N continued into Columbiana, Ohio, near Main Street, several locations captured the hopper car with a fire underneath the lead axle. A witness near South Vine Street also reported hearing an unusually loud metal scraping sound, but did not remember seeing a fire. In New Waterford, Ohio, train 32N was recorded with fire and sparks underneath the hopper car near Bull Creek Road and Boardman Street. In East Palestine, Ohio, train 32N was recorded at several locations near East Clark Street and North James Street. In the recordings, a distorted, high-pitched squealing sound is heard, then two loud bangs, train braking, and a bright flash. Following the train derailment at 8:54, the first 911 call to the East Palestino Police was received at 8:56. At 8:58, the first alarm to Station 24 went out to request all available fire and EMS personnel to respond to Pleasant and East Taggart Street for train derailment and fire. At about 9 p.m., the East Palestine Volunteer Fire Department arrived on scene. A second alarm to Station 24 went out at about 9:01, requesting all available fire and EMS to report to the station and respond to East Taggart and Alice Street. East Palestine Dispatch contacted the Norfolk Southern in Atlanta, Georgia at 9:04 to obtain information. Norfolk Southern took their information and instructed them that they would call back. At 9:07, the incident commander called dispatch from the scene to request a hazmat team and an engine and tanker from Springfield. At about 9:08, East Palestine Dispatch sent a request to Station 11 and Station 24, requesting all available personnel to respond. At 9:10, the director of the Columbiana County Emergency Management Agency received a cell phone call as the initial notification of the incident. At 9:15, the director of the Columbiana County EMA called the manager of Beaver County, Pennsylvania EMA to request hazmat mutual aid response. At 9:19, the train crew of 32N radioed the Norfolk Southern Railroad dispatcher and requested to cut the locomotives away from the train. The dispatcher approved the movement, and the locomotives were moved about 300 feet east of the train. At 9:24, the fire chief from the East Liverpool Fire Department Hazmat received the first notification of the activation. At 9:27, the train conductor, referencing his hazmat guidebook, learned the guidebook indicated they should be 1 mile away from the hazardous material, so the locomotives were moved east about 1 mile from their train. At 9:35, the Beaver County Emergency Services was notified and assistance requested. A full response was initiated from Beaver County Stations 11, 18, and 22. At about 9:45, the East Palestine Police Department began evacuating residential dwellings on Taggart Street and Clark Street that were close to the fire. At 10:23, the fire chief and East Liverpool Fire Department received an emailed train consist from the director of the Columbiana County EMA. At 10:34, Ohio State Patrol advised a 1-mile evacuation to be implemented. At about 11 p.m., Norfolk Southern hazmat personnel arrived on scene, and a railroad contractor arrived shortly thereafter. About midnight, fire suppression operations were suspended due to the hazmat lading of the tank cars and prescribed response procedure guidance being identified. The incident command post was also relocated to the East Palestine Fire Department. Mr. Stansel will now provide an overview of the hazardous materials investigation.
Thank you, Mr. Paya. Train 32N was a mixed freight train that included a total of 20 tank cars of hazardous materials as defined by Department of Transportation regulations, including 17 loaded tank cars with their quantities indicated on this slide, and 3 empty tank cars with residues. The derailment involved 11 of these 20 hazardous materials tank cars. 8 of the 11 derailed tank cars shown in this table released hazardous material commodities following the derailment. 3 DOT 111 tank cars carrying flammable and combustible materials, car numbers 36, 38, and 50, were initially breached by mechanical damage. All 5 DOT 105 vinyl chloride tank cars that were ultimately subjected to an explosives-induced vent and burn action 3 days after the derailment were not initially breached by the derailment damage. The following video further describes the release of hazardous materials and some key events that culminated in the incident command conducting a vent and burn action on the 5 tank cars loaded with vinyl chloride monomer on February 6, 2023. The train was transporting hazardous materials in 17 loaded tank cars and in 3 empty tank cars with residue. 11 of the derailed tank cars contained hazardous materials, including 5 specification DOT 105 tank cars loaded with 115,580 gallons of stabilized vinyl chloride monomer, a liquefied compressed flammable gas. NTSB investigators determined the initial derailment damage included 1 breached DOT 111 tank car containing flammable liquid butyl acrylate and 2 breached DOT 111 tank cars containing combustible liquids, 2-ethyl hexyl acrylate and ethylene glycol monobutyl ether. These released materials became involved in the post-derailment fire. The derailment also resulted in the breach of 6 tank cars containing non-hazardous liquids, including propylene glycol, diethylene glycol, and petroleum lubricating oil, which also ignited. Additionally, post-derailment fires burned 6 other derailed hopper cars carrying polyethylene plastic pellets and polyvinyl chloride granular plastic, as well as 3 box cars carrying other non-hazardous freight. The 5 vinyl chloride tank cars were exposed to pool fire conditions in the derailment pileup. This led to their pressure relief devices venting pressure and reclosing after normal pressure was restored within the tank cars. This is part of the normal functioning of a tank car's thermal protection system. All vapor released through the pressure relief devices ignited, as is typical in most derailment scenarios involving flammable materials where sources of ignition are present. On the early evening of Saturday, February 4, one vinyl chloride tank car forcefully released burning vapor over a 70-minute period. This was the last time any of the vinyl chloride tank cars vented material through their pressure relief devices. By the morning of February 5, emergency responders had mitigated the fire, but the vinyl chloride tank cars continued to concern authorities because their pressure relief devices had stopped operating and the temperature had risen as measured on the tank car shell surfaces. Emergency response crews found valves and fittings were thermally damaged, making them unusable for unloading the tank cars. The incident commanders ultimately scheduled a controlled vent and burn of the 5 vinyl chloride tank cars, which they determined was their last available mitigation option to avoid the risk of catastrophic tank failures that could have propelled fractured tank parts into residential areas. To prepare for the vent and burn, incident commanders expanded the evacuation zone to a 1-mile by 2-mile area. Crews dug pits to contain released vinyl chloride liquid while it vaporized and burned. On Monday, February 6, about 4:37 p.m., incident commanders initiated the vent and burn operation with tank car breaching explosive charges. The released vinyl chloride burned throughout the night of February 6. Wreckage clearing began on Tuesday, February 7. Residual fires were extinguished by noon on February 8. Post-derailment damage examinations found all 3 DOT 111 tank cars that released flammable and combustible materials had sustained tank head punctures and cracks. One of these DOT 111 tank cars also released combustible liquid from a bottom outlet valve where the operating handle opened during the derailment sequence. Although the examinations found no evidence of derailment-related mechanical breaching damage to the 5 DOT 105 tank cars carrying vinyl chloride, post-derailment fire exposure melted away aluminum protective housing covers on 3 of the 5 tank cars. Aluminum debris contaminated the discharge ports of their pressure relief devices and covered loading and unloading valves. The NTSB Materials Laboratory confirmed samples of the debris consisted predominantly of aluminum. The aluminum hand wheels for unloading and loading on the valves of 4 of the 5 tank cars were also destroyed by heat exposure. All 5 vinyl chloride tank cars were each punctured in 2 locations during the vent and burn actions that were conducted 3 days after the derailment. This slide shows examples of damages to tank cars that were carrying hazardous materials. The left image shows a cracked and breached tank head of a DOT 111 tank car that was transporting combustible liquid. The center image shows a DOT 111 tank car with an open bottom outlet valve and operating handle. And the right image shows a top fittings protective housing missing its aluminum cover and containing metallic debris within the housing and pressure relief device. After initial on-scene examinations were completed, contractors removed the pressure plate assemblies from the 5 vinyl chloride tank cars in preparation for further detailed examinations. Oxyvinyls, the vinyl chloride shipper, collected 12 samples of residues from internal tank components for analysis in a search for evidence whether the vinyl chloride monomer polymerized within the tank car to create a hazardous overpressure condition. Oxyvinyls employed the procedures listed here to compare the analytes to known data for polyvinyl chloride, or PVC, and found no evidence that PVC was present in any of the samples. NTSB investigators examined the pressure relief devices and angle valves to document their condition and determine if they still functioned in the as-received condition and to what level. The examination found no evidence of polymerized material or other foreign matter obstructing the pressure relief devices, the valves, or their internal components. O-rings for 3 pressure relief devices were heat damaged such that they leaked pressurized air below the rated start-to-discharge pressures. Valve and pressure relief device components of 1 tank car were destroyed and partially consumed in the fire. The pressure relief device components, including the valve stem and guide, were severely corroded. 1 pressure relief device valve was stuck in the closed position, and the device did not actuate significantly above its rated start-to-discharge pressure. The NTSB Materials Laboratory examined the disassembled components, finding the valve stem top guide inner diameter and valve stem itself were coated with layers of